This video is to help prepare you to visit your transplant center. When you'll come to the center, you'll meet a number of people, and our hope is by watching this video before your visit, you'll come prepared with your questions. To help you get ready for your visit to the transplant center, we're going to show you the true story of Eric and Errol Williams. In fact, a couple of years ago, Errol donated to his brother Eric. We hope that Eric's story will help you understand what's involved with transplantation and help you make the important decisions that you need to make about how to take care of your kidney disease.
Ever since I was in high school, I had huge plans for myself, and dialysis definitely wasn't part of that plan.
When he explained to me, some of the side effects of being on dialysis for an extended period of time, of course, it degenerates your bones. Just all these things that just ultimately were going to lead to him being in a debilitative state. I knew it would be important for him to go ahead with getting a transplant.
I wanted to find out about a transplant because it was another option, and it was more, this is your regular life. This is what I knew before dialysis, and I really wanted to get back to the old Eric and not being tied down, and that's when I really started exploring that option, asking questions.
Eric and I share that knowledge is power, and the more information that we had, we felt like we could make an informed decision and know what to ask prior to actually getting there, so we didn't have as many surprises, so to speak.
The doctors were giving me good answers, and they were telling me the dangers and the rewards, and the rewards outweighed the risk.
I knew he wanted to change his life, and I wanted to be there to support him.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I'm Kathleen Hogan, kidney transplant coordinator.
I'm Eric Williams, and this is my wife, Pamela.
Hi there. Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. So I have all your paperwork. I was wondering if you had a chance to review the information that we sent you.
We
Yes.
did, and we have a lot of questions.
All right, great. Well, we'll help you get some of those answers. Let's get started.
Okay.
When you go into the transplant center, the first person you're going to meet is your transplant coordinator, and it's our job to facilitate getting you through the transplant process. So today we're going to review the transplant process. We're going to do what's called Transplant 101, which is an informative class. We're going to go through a lot of details about the transplant process. And we're also going to talk about your health after transplant and what it's going to take for you to maintain your health after transplant. That includes a lot of medications that you'll need to take throughout the life of your kidney.
That's what I really need to know.
And then I actually had a few questions regarding the insurance coverage and what our insurance will cover and what will be our responsibility.
Okay, well that's great because also you're going to meet the social worker today, and she'll review any financial concerns or questions that you may have.
Good.
And then in addition, you'll meet with our surgeon, and we'll also be doing some medical evaluations, some medical testing to ensure that you're healthy to receive a kidney transplant.
Okay, very good.
Each transplant center has its own standard criteria for evaluating transplant patients. The transplant center will assist you to schedule all your testing, which is likely to include a chest x-ray, an EKG, a TB skin test, a pap smear and a mammogram for females, a colonoscopy, and/or cardiac stress testing.
I went to my nephrologist, and he said, you need to go on dialysis. And why? Because I wasn't sick, and then that's when I was first introduced to dialysis, and that definitely was not in the plans. Once I realized the time consumption, the 3 hours, then 3.5, then 4 hours, and the fluid restrictions and the food restrictions, and where was I gonna work when I had to commit 4 hours 3 times a week, a total of 12 hours a week on a machine.
Unfortunately, there's no cure for kidney failure. There are only treatment options. One treatment option is dialysis, and one is transplant. The disadvantage of dialysis is it's very restrictive. You don't feel very well when you're on dialysis. You have restrictive diets, fluid restrictions.
Long hours on the machine. I'm going through it now, and I'm really tired of it.
Well, the advantage of the machine certainly is that it sustains your life. It also doesn't require you to take multiple medications. It also doesn't require you to have a major surgery.
Right.
A successful kidney transplant, however, can offer you a very good quality of life, a much better quality of life.
And that's really what we're hoping for.
Yeah.
On the days that you have dialysis, you feel very, lots of people feel very tired. They have to go home and go to bed after dialysis. And then they start to feel better the next day, and then they have to go back to dialysis the following day. So they have real roller coaster energy levels. So it's not just being hooked to the machine that's so cumbersome, but it's also just feeling generally sick a lot of your life. Recent studies have shown that successful transplant recipients will live longer and have a much better quality of life off of dialysis. A kidney transplant can treat your kidney problems, but it's going to be very important that you take care of yourself, you watch your state of health very carefully after transplant, and take your transplant medications. The transplant medications actually will protect your kidney transplant. Your immune system, which is your natural protector of your body, will protect your body from virus, infection, illness. It also will recognize that transplant as foreign. So your immune system's first instinct is to attack that kidney. The medications you take will actually suppress your immune system to allow that kidney to function and not be attacked.
Okay, how long will I have to take these medicines?
You'll take these medications for the life of the transplant.
And what are some of the side effects that he might experience from those?
Good
drugs?
question. Everybody will react a little differently to medications. Some of the side effects are minor, some are more troublesome. So for some people, we actually are able to readjust some medications and some doses to allow them to feel better, to feel healthier. But what's really important for you to remember is that you should not ever stop your transplant medications without talking to us. If you feel as though you can't take something or you don't want to take something, it's really important that you talk to us first. If you stop taking your medications, the kidney transplant may have an episode of rejection. You may get very, very ill. You may end up back in the hospital, and you also may lose your transplant, end up back on dialysis. So it's very important that you speak to us without stopping those medications. Okay. When you're discharged from the hospital, we're going to ask that you go to the lab and get some testing done. It's going to be routine testing so that we can monitor the medication levels in your bloodstream and also watch the function of the kidney very closely. It's going to be very important that you do that in addition to coming to transplant clinic. We're going to want to see you so that we can check your vital signs, look at your medication sheet, make sure you're taking your medications appropriately, and make sure that generally you're feeling okay. One of the things that we find is sometimes that you might look good, but your labs don't look so good, and some of your medications may need adjusting. On the other side of that is that sometimes the labs look great and you feel terrible. So sometimes it's good for us to see you, to check your vital signs, make sure you don't have a temperature, ask you some questions to be sure that you don't have a problem that maybe you're not aware of.
You have to pay attention in the educational classes because you need to know what you're getting into. As long as you have the graft inside of you, you have to take the medication. And then they also taught us that no matter how good you feel, continue to take your medicines because that's why you feel so good, because you are taking your medicines. Education is the most important part.
Okay, we're all finished here. So I'm going to take you to your next appointment with our transplant surgeon, Dr. Sanchez. Okay. It's right down the hall.
All right.
Essentially, they come in overwhelmed with all this information they have just gotten from multiple doctors' orientation sessions. And what we try to do is to filter it out and just focus in on the surgical aspects of treating their end-stage renal disease.
I was nervous about going under the knife.
It was my first time ever being operated on, touched, or anything in the hospital, and I guess the only thing in my mind that I was concerned about was the amount of pain. So we did a lot of research on how much pain, the donor would go through. And that was probably my only concern, but it wasn't going to hinder me from doing it.
The reason I went for it was because transplant was an option. Dialysis, for me, was not an option. And if I had the choice between the two, I wanted to try the transplant to resume my life.
My brother was diagnosed with kidney disease, and it was just such a terrible thing to see his body go through these different changes and having to go on dialysis. And you just want to help. What can I do? Sign me up. Where do I need to be, tested? What do I need to do? And you just want to make a better life for them. And you do what you have to do.
My brother did want to get tested to be a donor. I was a little scared about it, but I was a little excited as well.
When the opportunity came up for me to donate, of course I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about it. Him being the big brother, you don't have to do this. You know, you don't. I can just go on the list, and there's no way that I was gonna let him wait. And if I found out if I needed to be tested, what I need to do, I wanted to help immediately.
If I can get a transplant, my brother would like to be my donor.
Oh, that's excellent, because a living donor kidney transplant is the best possible choice for you. It's actually the Cadillac of kidney transplants. Whereas if you did get a deceased donor, that's actually more like a used car with some mileage.
Okay. When my brother told me that he wanted to donate a kidney to me, I was flattered. I was nervous, and I told him, listen, I appreciate it. I'm okay with dialysis right now, but I was more nervous for him. But like I said, I was excited as well.
He tried to talk me out of it, but I knew in the back of his mind, I know my brother. You know, he was tired, the family was tired, and it was time. I told him, you need to worry about yourself. That's the most important thing.
If the patient can get a living donor kidney transplant, it's very important because the success rate of living donor kidney transplants are much better than if they received a deceased donor kidney transplant. And the success rates are sustained over 1 year and 5 year periods of time.
So what does my brother have to do?
Well, your brother has to go through some testing. First of all, we need to make sure that it's safe for him to donate the kidney, and also to make sure that he can live the rest of his life with the one kidney that he has. And also we need to make sure that this kidney is good quality that we can transplant into you as well.
We had a big concern for Eric's brother and just his health, his well-being, as well as his family, and the fact that, you know, we wanted him to be able to work and be able to have his job and not be off work too long.
How soon could we get it done?
We could do it as soon as both of you are approved. If you're a patient on dialysis, you can get a kidney transplant as long as the workup is completed and you're approved as a potential kidney recipient. As soon as a kidney becomes available for you from the deceased donor list, then that's how soon you can get a kidney transplant.
If I didn't get a living donor and I have to go on the waiting list, how long will I be on the list?
Well, if you're approved for a kidney transplant, then on average it's about 3 to 5 years on the waiting list, depending on your blood type.
And how is the list set up?
The list for kidney transplant is set up by the governing body for kidney transplant, or UNOS. It's the United Network for Organ Sharing. And what they look into are basically the patient's blood type, the degree of match between the donor and the recipient, and also the waiting time on the transplant list.
How do you decide who's getting a kidney?
To make it fair, the computer makes the decision. When a deceased donor kidney becomes available, then the computer will look at the degree of match between the donor and recipient and the length of time on the wait list, and then the computer will generate the list of names. When the list of names pops up, the first person on that list gets the kidney transplant. Unless they're not available, turn it down, or are too ill for the transplant. Then the list moves down to the next person, so on and so on. If you want to increase your chances to get a kidney transplant and just get it done as soon as possible, the deceased donor pool is divided into 2 categories. The first category is the standard criteria donor, and the second criteria is the expanded criteria donor.
What's the difference between the first list and the second list?
Let me just demonstrate on the board here. What color is this? We have the deceased donor kidney pool, which essentially is broken down into the expanded criteria donor pool and then a standard criteria donor pool. If you look at the expanded criteria donor kidneys, they're like used cars with high mileage. If you look at the standard criteria donor kidney, it's like a used car with less mileage, meaning that these kidneys will run, but they won't run as far. Compared to these, they'll run, but they'll run further.
So where do they come from?
The expanded criteria donor kidneys come from donors who are older or have a history of high blood pressure or died of a stroke.
Now, if I'm on the second list, will I still be on the first list?
Yes, if you're on the second list or the expanded criteria donor list, you are already automatically on the first list or the standard criteria donor list. So yes, you will be on both lists.
Hi, how's it going?
Really good. We're getting a lot of helpful information, and everyone's been very helpful.
Good, glad to hear it. I just want to remind you, after you leave here today, if there's any questions or any concerns that you have, please be sure and give us a call.
We'll do it.
So I think your next appointment's with our social worker, and her office is right over here.
Okay, thank you.
All right, you're
All right.
welcome.
Patients are usually overwhelmed when they first come to us, and I want them to feel confident in the team as well as the hospital. I'm going to be asking you some questions today so we get to know you better and so that we can meet your needs better throughout the transplant process.
Okay, good. There are some things we aren't sure of.
Good. Well, I look forward to the interview, and we'll do everything we can to answer your questions. When you first meet the social worker, they'll do an evaluation because we want to get to know you as a person and get to know your personal situation, your family situation, and your lifestyle, because we want to be able to help you maintain that or return to that after a transplant.
I was nervous about my work schedule because I didn't know if my employers would be sensitive to what I had to go through. I knew that they were hopeful for me, but in turn, they had to do a job as well.
What is your work schedule now?
I'm working part-time while I'm on dialysis.
Do you know what kind of insurance you have?
Well, I'd like to find out what our medication coverage is.
One of the first questions that patients ask is, how am I going to pay for this transplant as well as the transplant medications? And so we want to help alleviate any of those fears that they might have so they can feel comfortable going into this. Patients hear about the high costs of a transplant and maintaining a successful transplant, so this is a common fear that they have. If you're on dialysis, you're likely already on Medicare, and after a transplant, you're eligible for Medicare for 3 years, unless you're otherwise on disability.
Yeah, and we really would like to speak to somebody about how our private insurance would work after those 3 years are up.
Well, typically what happens is Medicare is your primary insurance for the first 3 years after a transplant, where your private insurance is secondary. And then after 3 years, your private insurance is the primary payer.
Okay, and then we'll just need a little bit of understanding about how that'll affect us at that point.
Right. Medicare is just about for everyone, and everyone's situation is unique. We need to find out what your personal situation is so that we could connect you with the appropriate resources based on your personal situation. I understand your brother wants to donate.
Yes, he's ready to be tested.
Some ways in which you might ask for a potential donor is to simply make your need known, that you've been to the clinic, that you need a transplant, and they may in fact just volunteer knowing that you're a transplant candidate. Other times it may be easier just to sit down with individuals within your family and see if anyone is comfortable letting them know that the transplant program has asked whether or not you have any living donors. And sometimes family members may also advocate on your behalf. So if it's uncomfortable or awkward for you, you could talk to a family member and they may then inquire within your family or social circle.
If my brother can't donate, do I need to get another blood relative?
No, a living donor doesn't need to be biologically related. You can have a friend or a coworker or someone within your social circle be a donor as well.
And then how would that work with our insurance?
Typically what happens is the recipient's health insurance pays the cost for a living donor transplant, but it doesn't cover the non-medical related costs such as travel and lodging and the expenses that maybe a donor could incur while they're there at the transplant center. What's not covered for the donor, though, is the travel, the lodging, and meals, and other donor-related expenses. But there is a program through the National Living Donor Assistance Center that can assist the donor with those types of costs that they might have, and the donor social worker would discuss that with them at the time of their interview.
Okay, that's great.
By law, we have to inform patients of a healthcare directive. And so, Eric, you would need to think about who might speak on your behalf if you were unable to do so.
The surgeon told us all the risk and what could happen.
Good.
Yeah, and then we can talk about it and make some plans.
That's a good idea to do it way prior to the surgery so you're not focusing on that the day before, since you'll have other things to think about.
We definitely had to talk about the bad things, had to look at, if for some reason, Eric we're in a coma or whatever. You know, would he want to be on life support?
Is there anyone that will be available to help you during the recovery period after surgery?
Yes, my mom's going to come down and stay with us for a while.
That's good. That's so important. We'd like to help counsel your spouse or partner or caregiver because it can be a stressful time for them when their loved one is going through a transplant. Have you talked about how much time you'll need off from work after surgery?
Yes, my boss knows about it, and he's very supportive.
Good.
And we've gone through our finances, and I believe we're prepared.
So what happens now?
Well, now that you've completed all your transplant testing, the entire transplant team will meet and discuss your case to review all your results. You will be notified to alert you whether or not you've been accepted as a transplant candidate.
And what about my brother?
Actually, your brother can start his medical evaluation. Now that you've finished all your testing, we want to be sure that he's medically healthy enough to donate.
Okay.
All right. Well, if you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to call.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Very nice to meet you.
Very much. Nice to meet you as well.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. For someone who's about to explore the transplant option, I would tell them, educate yourself financially, emotionally, long-term, be open with your employer, and just arm yourself with as much ammunition as you possibly can, and that's just the knowledge and the askings of the questions. Listening to the transplant team, the team is the operative word, because they are a team of professionals that they want you to succeed with your transplant. So it is imperative that you do listen and abide by whatever they tell you to do.
The biggest reward for me was right after the surgery. I asked the doctor, how did it go? Everything went beautifully. Immediately, the body started accepting and started working. And he can live a normal life. What's better than that?
Diabetes is one of the leading causes of kidney disease and kidney failure in the United States. But also there are other problems associated with diabetes, such as heart disease, vascular disease, other things that may impact your post-op recovery course. If you have diabetes and kidney failure, your options for transplant include kidney pancreas transplant, and at some select institutions could be kidney transplant with islet cell transplant. Diabetes can be cured with a transplant, mainly with a whole organ transplant called a pancreas transplant. This is often performed with a combination of a kidney transplant or after a kidney transplant. The studies show for patients with a kidney pancreas transplant, the pancreas will actually be used to protect the kidney transplant long-term from the effects of diabetes, in that the diabetes is actually cured with the pancreas transplant. The pancreas does have two major functions. The first is for digestion, and the second is for production of insulin. There are two types of diabetes. One does not have insulin production. The other one can't use the insulin that's made. Therefore, the ones that don't make insulin will benefit from pancreas transplant more than the ones that don't utilize the insulin. If we do a pancreas transplant and it's a whole organ pancreas transplant, we do transplant both the part that produces the insulin and also the part that helps with the digestion. If you're a diabetic considering kidney pancreas versus kidney transplant alone, the patients that do receive kidney pancreas transplants as a combination do better than kidney transplant alone. If you're a diabetic considering some form of transplant for diabetes, an islet cell transplant can be a possibility if you meet institutional criteria. The islet cells are the part of the pancreas that produce insulin. Islet cells are harvested from a deceased donor, in which we take the whole organ that's not usable for a whole organ transplant, but is actually ideal for an islet cell transplant. Therefore, we take the pancreas and then process it so that we refine the islet cells out of the pancreas itself and then infuse those cells only into the patient. The success rates from islet cell transplants are variable and frequently need multiple islet cell infusions to achieve control of diabetes. For a kidney pancreas transplant, your options include first a simultaneous kidney pancreas transplant, or the second option could be a kidney transplant from a living donor, followed by a deceased donor pancreas transplant. The major advantage for a combined kidney pancreas transplant from a single deceased donor would be that it is one operation, and the second would be that it's from the same set of tissue types. The disadvantage to the combined transplant is the waiting time, and perhaps you could be waiting as long as 5 years to receive the transplants from a deceased donor. The second approach to get a kidney pancreas transplant involves getting the kidney transplant first, either from a living donor or a deceased donor, and then, after everything is said and done, going back and getting a pancreas transplant performed. The major advantage, especially in patients who have living donor kidney transplants performed, is that you get off dialysis much sooner. However, if we do a kidney transplant from a deceased donor, that still involves a significant waiting time. At that point also, by doing a kidney transplant alone, it's a much shorter operation. The disadvantages of getting a pancreas transplant after a kidney transplant include 2 operations, 2 hospitalizations, and 2 bouts of immunosuppression medications. If you're a patient that wants to do a kidney transplant and is hesitating on the pancreas transplant, the reasons to do a pancreas transplant are multiple. Number 1, it will establish control for diabetes. Number 2, it could potentially cure the diabetes as long as the transplant is functioning. And with the pancreas functioning, it's going to protect your kidney transplant for a long period of time. And there could possibly prevent kidney failure in the long run. Diabetes can affect the new transplant kidney, but it will take a long period of time to do so, and eventually the kidney will fail, and you will possibly need another transplant at that time. In that respect, we have to follow you closely after the transplant to make sure your sugars are under control, and also that the diabetes is not affecting the rest of your body. And if it's doing so, then we can pick this up earlier and perhaps change the course of the diabetes if possible. To find out which transplant would most benefit you, please consult with your institution.